Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Let me begin this episode by speaking plainly to business leaders. If you're a CEO, a board member, an investor, or a senior operator, this conversation is not theoretical, and it's not ideological either. It's not partisan. It is about risk. Specifically, it's about how the erosion of democratic norms in the United States is beginning to show up quietly but measurably in cost structures, margins, workforce stability, regulatory exposure, and long-term resilience. Markets can absorb volatility, but they can't absorb unpredictability. And when a country begins to govern through exception, through permanent scandal, coercive normalization, and politicized enforcement, well, that predictability, it starts to erode. And that erosion is not abstract. It gets priced in. Businesses do not require democracy, but they do require rules that they can rely on. When civil liberties become conditional, enforcement becomes politicized, and institutions lag behind executive action. Three things happen almost immediately. First, compliance costs rise because firms must now plan for regulatory whiplash rather than stable oversight. Second, insurance and legal exposure, well, it increases as force enforcement and litigation becomes more volatile. Thirdly, decision horizons, well, folks, they shrink. Leaders stop investing for durability and start hedging for shock. None of this shows up as a single headline. It shows up quarter by quarter. Manifest Destiny 2.0, we've heard a lot about that in the news today, and especially since the issuance of the United States National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy. We think that is only relating to national defense security, but it definitely has household to geopolitical, economic, bottom dollar line impacts. Now, that Manifest Destiny 2.0 policy is often discussed in cultural or political terms. For business, it operates as a governing logic for hierarchy and exception. When immigration enforcement becomes erratic and performative, well, labor markets, they begin to destabilize. Construction, agriculture, logistics, healthcare, hospitality, they all feel it. Firms are forced to absorb higher turnover, disrupted crews, compliance uncertainty, and reputational risks for actions they don't control. This is not ideology. It's operational friction. Consider a mid-sized manufacturing firm in the Midwest. Under stable governance, workforce planning is a solvable problem. Under coercive uncertainty, it's not. ICE raids, even rumored ones, change worker behavior before enforcement occurs. Absenteeism, well, it starts to spike. Productivity drops. Training investments walk out the door. Management responds by holding excess labor, increasing overtime, or automating prematurely, each of which compresses margins. This is not a moral judgment. It's a systems effect. Monroe Doctrine 2.0 extends this logic beyond U.S. borders. When the United States signals that sovereignty is conditional and coercion is acceptable, partners begin to hedge. Nearshoring plans, they start to stall. Cross-border infrastructure slows. Political risk premiums rise, oftentimes exponentially. Firms operating in Latin America and the Caribbean now plan not just for local instability, but for U.S.-generated volatility. That is new, folks, and it is also very costly. In military terms, deterrence depends on credibility. In business terms, contracts do. When rule of law confidence erodes, contracts become less valuable. Enforcement risks rise. Arbitration becomes politicized. Legal remedies, they start to slow. Firms compensate by pricing in risk or walking away. Either way, value is lost. Capital is not emotional. It is anticipatory. And when internal instability rises, lenders start to tighten. Insurance premiums increase for civil disturbance, political risk, and business interruptions. Boards begin to ask, what happens if the next election is contested? What happens if enforcement turns arbitrary? What happens if protests shut down logistics? Those questions don't stop investment, they reprice it. Now, none of these pressures alone will sink a healthy firm. Together, they compound. Rising labor costs, regulatory uncertainty, higher insurance premiums, shorter planning horizons, reputational exposure. This is how civic erosion becomes strategic drag. Not collapse, not compression, system disruption. And again, it's priced in. Let me close where I began, with business leaders. The most dangerous illusion in this moment is that democratic erosion is someone else's problem. Well, it's not. It's showing up in thinner margins, higher volatility, brittle supply chains, and rising non-market risk. Firms that survive this era will not be the most aggressive. They will be the most resilient. Those that understand that legitimacy, legal, civic, institutional, is not a soft value, but a hard asset. Because once governance becomes unpredictable, efficiency becomes fragility. And fragility, well, that's expensive. From battlefields to boardrooms, the lesson is the same. Democracy is not charity, it's infrastructure. And infrastructure, once neglected, is always more expensive to rebuild than to maintain. This has been the Civic Brief in the wise way. Strategy begins at home, but folks, so does resilience.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.